Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this masterclass on tendinopathy. I'm going to really focus on lower limb tendons. And I think a really key point is if you understand tendon load, you really understand tendons. So, what I want you to gather from this presentation is that if you understand, is your patient talking high tendon load, you can differentiate different types of injury, but also you can help them with their presentation and some advice and some rehabilitation. So before we start, if you are thinking about tendons, actually there are 4 different types of tendon injury. So the first one is tendinopathy. So when we talk about tendinopathy, we talk about local pain with dysfunction. And what I'm going to focus on is what that means. How do you pick that clinically? Because it's quite different from our other different types of tendon injury. So our peritendon, you'll remember, is the sliding and gliding synovial layers over the tendon. So clinically, they have a very different presentation to tendinopathy, and they have different signs and symptoms, but equally they need a different management plan. Tendon rupture we'll briefly touch on, and then bursa we'll talk about when is bursa part of the enthesis. So the enthesis is the bone tendon bursal kind of junction or intersection. So when is the bursa part of the presentation, or when is it a differential diagnosis? So every time someone comes to you, you need to be thinking, is this tendon injury? Is it tendinopathy? Is it peritendon? Is it rupture? Is it bursa? Or is it the joint? Is it a differential diagnosis? Because all of those things actually require you to think about the injury and your athlete differently. So I think a really good place to start is tendon load. So if you understand tendon load, you really start to understand how to remove the provocative load, how to, get people back to safe loads, how do you progress them to the loads they need to, be able to withstand as an athlete or as, a kind of functioning, athletic person. So we're going to think about tendon load in terms of 4 different types of load. So tensile load is when you think about your tendons storing and releasing energy like a spring. So for it to be high tendon load, it has to be fast. So when we're thinking about tendon load, it's got to be quick, high energy storage and release. So anything slow or static is easy for a tendon. So we're thinking high tendon load or fast or high tensile load for tendinopathy. So your examples for the Achilles are things like, running and jumping and changing direction. For the patellar tendon, it's things like, jumping and fast, big lunging change of direction. So you can start to appreciate why people with Achilles tendinopathy can be really variable in their presentation. You can have really athletic people that run, but actually you can have older people that just kind of, move around, but they go up and down stairs. So they're still using their Achilles tendon like a spring throughout their lifespan. Whereas your people with patellar tendinopathy, to use your patellar tendon as a spring, you have to be a very high load athlete. You have to be jumping or doing those big lunging, fast change of direction activities like basketball and tennis. So this really helps you automatically in terms of your clinical presentation and your differential diagnosis. So the person in front of you has to be talking about high tendon load for that tendon. So if it's patellar tendinopathy, are they a young, jumping, particularly male athlete who, plays basketball, volleyball? Your older person, your female athlete, just far less likely. Those people don't put as much load through their patellar tendon. And actually, even in our very elite athletes, patellofemoral joint pain is really common. So you've got to be thinking, do they have the ability to put that much load through their patellar tendon? I talked about the Achilles tendon being a condition throughout the lifespan. We've got our young elite athletes or our young active people, but even as you walk downstairs, you step off a curb, you still actually use that Achilles tendon as a spring. And that's why we can see this condition throughout our lifespan. So every time you listen to someone with possible tendon pain, just think, are they using that tendon as a spring?